Welcome, everybody, to the Power of New. We are your hosts, Mark and Julie Appleyard, founders of Anothen Global Ministries here in beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina.
Today, we're inviting you to join us in a new conversation around discipling nations through spiritual leadership principles that work at work. This interactive podcast will take you further and dive you deeper into exploring our Heavenly Father's always perfect love as together we engage with real impact stories from kingdom marketplace leaders across the world.
Yes, and the Power of New podcast relies on the support of its listeners like you, so you can help us continue delivering this content by donating through the provided link on the ticker below. If you're a US resident or US-based business looking to donate, your donation is, of course, always tax deductible.
Today's guest has been a friend of Anothen for many years. He's a certified financial planner professional dedicated to helping clients achieve clarity of vision and develop detailed plans to actualize that vision. His journey began as a US Navy helicopter pilot and Afghanistan combat veteran, followed by a role as a Pentagon Let's try that again. Followed by a role as a Pentagon Defense budget analyst. He's a person with a unique ability to help people seamlessly integrate the macro with the micro, understanding how the big picture and the practical details work together in harmony. Ryan Haley, welcome to the Power of New.
Thank you, guys. That was quite an introduction. It is an honor to be with you.
Now, how long has it been that we've known each other for, mate? It's been a while.
We connected at the Hub Nation conference in Bend, Oregon. I think
That's
I want to say it was 2017 or 2018. So yeah, it's like 6 or 7 years now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has. You've been on quite a journey together over those years.
That's for sure.
You were a podcaster, I think, and you were at, was it a Charis Bible College or Bible at that? I think something like that.
College.
Yeah, that's right.
In Woodland Park.
Yeah, that's right. How long were you there for?
3 years.
Yep.
Did you did you have a major or something in was it all theological focused, or was it?
So the first 2 years is the core program where you get your degree in biblical studies. It's just a common program. And then the optional third year program, it's kind of roughly correlates to what some people refer to as the 7 mountains of influence, what you guys refer to as nations, which I like that fresh take we just discussed. And I ended up doing the business school, which was counterintuitive because I'd already done an MBA program and a post-grad business fellowship at Georgetown and thought for sure this would be ministry school, but just felt like, as we say in Charis, and you guys have probably heard similar language, my baby just seemed to be kicking in that direction.
Yeah.
What
makes your baby leap? Yes,
exactly. Yeah,
it's a reference, isn't it? Is it to Elizabeth and Mary? Yeah, that's right.
It's a reference
John
to
and
Elizabeth.
baby kicked, or when John in Elizabeth's stomach kicked when Mary walked in with Jesus. That almost seemed like bad stewardship, but as I'm sure we'll get into many times, even in the very practical world of business and finance in my world, there are some counterintuitive decisions that you can't see until later. And you're like, oh, wow, that is amazing. And that certainly ended up being the case. So that was the practical focus I took in my third year of that. And then in a roundabout way led to kind of what I'm doing now. So that was quite a journey. I think I was in between my first and second year when I first met you, actually.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, crazy. I've got here a book here that happens to have your name on the bottom of it. Right there. Yeah. #1 bestseller. Tell us about this. A Better Way. God's Design, Less Stress, More Rest, and Greater Success.
Yeah, so that was kind of, I started writing that after I graduated my third year in 2019. And it was something the Lord had kind of put on my heart. Even before I got to Charis, I started just having this sense of, I was actually at that fellowship program at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. right before coming to Charis, when I kind of just got this sense that I should just be collecting people's testimonies, like business owners and people in the marketplace, their testimonies. I didn't really know what I was going to do with them. So I started doing that when I first got to Charis my first year. And then as I was talking to somebody about it, I was just getting an interview kind of like on the, I was just getting like little snippets I was putting in a Word document. Again, no idea where this was going. And then one of my friends said, I was recording it on the iPhone at this point on the voice memos. He's like, I wonder if this should be a podcast at some point. And I had never thought about that. And I was like, I could actually see myself doing something like, an interview style, like what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And then that's about the time I met you. I got that podcast up and running, got the ABW LLC created, and then kind of just felt led to write a book about primarily it's autobiographical, my own life stories and testimonies, but also bringing in other people's. But the desire was to put some flesh and some real life perspective and experience to biblical truths, and particularly the big revelation for me, which is this idea of grace and rest, because I'm very naturally, being in the military, just being kind of a very driven, performance oriented person. That was such a huge revelation. And then when I saw that, like, not only can you have more rest and less stress in your life by doing that way, you can actually have even greater success when the Lord is the one providing the increase instead of you trying to generate it on your own self-effort. And so that was the whole journey. And then I was blessed to get Tony Dungy to write the foreword, former NFL and Super Bowl winning coach. And that was just an amazing experience. So yeah, we had a good launch, and I have to qualify. #1 bestseller. It's not necessarily the same as a New York Times #1 bestseller. Amazon, it's a different ranking in the world, but we did get 9 out of 10 categories at one point on the Kindle.
Incredible.
Okay.
It was better than we were expecting. So that was a blessing.
That's good.
Yeah, amazing. And I just love the fact that there's always been the time I've known you, such a yes in your spirit. For just going, you know what, I've got something here and I'm not going to just sit on it. I'm going to do something about it. And I mean, it's a great work that you've put together there, and it's still available on Amazon, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll give you just what we've got there, A Better Way, God's Better Way, Ryan Haley, and get a hold of that. It's great stories, as you said. It's like his life story as well, and as well as then just this concept. And I think in a world that we're in right now, particularly this concept of what does it mean to live from a place of rest, and this paradox that in actual fact it's from that place that we actually have even greater success, not less.
I love the subtitle here, that the subtitle is Living a Life That Demands a Supernatural Explanation. I'm all about that. I will confess to I'm not having read this yet, but I knew you'd written a book. I did not actually know that he had a copy. I
didn't either, actually. But in fact, it's coming from, it's endorsed by someone near and dear to you. Actually, you'll see your husband's name and endorsement
in there somewhere. Yeah, so it'll go on the pile. But I guess a question that I have for you, just to go a little bit deeper on that. Clearly, you've, and we'll probably explore a little bit more of this in a minute, but a Navy pilot, helicopter pilot, Afghanistan veteran, military mindset, kind of connected now with seminary experience. And you probably answer this question in the book if I would sit down and read it. But for our listeners today, to whet their appetite a little bit, what is one thing? Can you name one thing, or maybe two if you have to, that helped you make that step from, okay, driven, go, to this is how I rest? What was one thing that helped you step across that boundary and into the supernatural?
That's a great question, and it's tough to nail it down because it's such a journey, which is why I literally had to write a feature-length book. But I would say, if I had to boil it down, the first thing that came to my mind, which is usually correct, was kind of reaching end of self. And as I start off with in the beginning of the book, that process started a long time ago when I crashed a Navy helicopter when I was active. And that really kind of, I had drifted many years. I grew up in a Christian home, was saved at a young age, and gradually started drifting more and more, starting in college. And by that point, I was almost unrecognizable to myself and probably a lot of spiritual perspective. And that really kind of was a literal and figurative come to Jesus moment. So that started back a long time ago, 2007. And book wasn't written until 2020, but or published till 2020, I should say. But that I think probably, I don't think that's God's, necessarily his go-to or his intended way for us. But unfortunately, human nature being what it is, I find for myself and many others, unfortunately, we tend to have to get to that kind of point of being in extremis, as we say in the Navy and aviation perspective, but also in life, where some extreme circumstance or event is required to wake us up and shake us up, and that was the case for me.
Yeah.
I don't know too many people that have been a Navy helicopter pilot and then survived a crash from that. That would probably bring about a bit of a transitional moment, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I think all of it's how you respond to it. It's not an automatic thing, but that was a big enough event that I couldn't kind of push it under the rug, so to speak. So for me, that was, I think if I had to say, really in a tight, succinct one answer response, that's probably it. But, the journey and how it unfolded over many years is, part of the process.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for that.
And now you're in the financial space specifically, and I know you've been also in the real estate space a bit as well, and all of those things as well. Maybe we can start doing our deeper dive here too about how do you integrate your faith into your financial planning practices to help people, achieve this life of purpose and fulfillment and meaning, because we know you very well as someone who sees what they do very much as a vehicle to bring the blessing and the love of God to people right where they are.
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually started off, I did not necessarily have an aspiration to be in full-time financial services. I was actually doing some coaching work before that, and really helping people to identify similar in many ways to what you guys do, but helping people to identify what I call their sweet spot. And I talk about that in the book, of kind of that intersection of their greatest, gift or strength, their deepest pain, their deepest passion, and also their greatest level of service. And at the center of that is what I call the sweet spot. And that's where I think you're the most alive, productive, fulfilled, prosperous, profitable, and can have the greatest impact. And so in the process of doing that a lot, no matter where they were financially or professionally, it seemed like it always came down to a financial. It's like, okay, we've identified these things. Now, how do we actually bridge that gap in a practical sense and make it happen? And it seemed to almost always have a financial component to it. And so in the middle of one of these engagements, I connected with someone who would eventually be the general agent I work with Unbridled Wealth, which I've got kind of two hats in what I wear. I've got the insurance side, which is Unbridled Wealth, not officially a Christian company, but very, very kingdom minded. I met at Heaven in Business in 2020, right after I'd released that book. And then I've got now the more recent registered investment advisory and financial planning aspect. So two different but related things. And from the coaching, I got into this place where, one thing that I'll say I think is really important from any perspective, whether it's financial, professional, personal, is that my way of operating is usually that I like to share from a place of personal overflow. So something I have experienced, something I'm personally doing. I like the way you say it, Mark, which is I don't practice what I preach. I preach what I practice, or what I've been practicing.
And I have my wife to credit with that very amazing quote.
I use it a lot, so that's good. I didn't know that.
There you go.
So a little attribution there for you, but I love that. And I think it's so important because no matter what you're doing, especially if you're, in business or you're selling something to somebody, if you're not buying it or doing it yourself, you kind of got to ask why, right? So that's kind of how that started. I had been in real estate, like you said. I had, while I was in Karis, I met some people, and that's a whole crazy other story, but ended up buying, an investment property and learned a ton through that, made a really good return on it. And I also started using a cash value life insurance policy, which I didn't know even anything about that. It was just all very kind of supernaturally orchestrated. But all those things were things that I had done. And then I had been just managing my own investments for many years, even while I was in the Navy. So I just kind of had this knack for all that stuff. But I think, once I got into the financial planning program, I started to feel like that was really being confirmed to me as an actual calling. And of course, I've talked about this for a long time. We know that what we do is not just, a 9 to 5, Monday through Thursday or Friday. That's, this is our ministry. And so part of financial planning, there's even a subfield within financial planning called financial life planning that really goes deeper into like what a lot of people call the touchy-feely, like, soft side of things of, values, thoughts about money, goals, very, very personally oriented. And what I found is that as quantitative and analytical as it can be, at the end of the day, the whole point we're doing any of this is not to hit some number of income or cash flow or net worth. It's ultimately so people can live their best life, however they define it, right? And money is just a tool that can facilitate that, but it's worthless in and of itself. Like, it doesn't have any intrinsic value, in my opinion, other than how it can improve your life and the lives of those around you and the things that you care about, right? So it's all about trade-offs, right? Financially and personally. So helping to frame those decision trade-offs in an optimal way for people, incorporating, there's kind of this spectrum of time and money. And if you see people that have a lot of one, like an extreme amount of one, they typically have very little or none of the other.
Right.
So, for example, if you have somebody who's, a multi-billionaire, they've got a lot of money, they probably don't have a whole lot of time, right? They're probably pretty busy.
That's exactly right.
Whereas on the other end of the spectrum,
I've met some of them.
you've probably interviewed some before here, and I won't share specifically, but I think we've seen those people are amazing, but it's a real gift for them to give you even 30 minutes of their time because it's so precious and valuable and constrained. Whereas then you have somebody who might be homeless, no bills to pay, all the time in the world, not probably much money, right? So those are two extreme examples just to kind of illustrate the point. But most people are obviously in between that, right? So it's what's most important to you, and how do you assign value and priority with a dollar sign next to it, right? And that is, as I've been talking even recently with my family, that typically you can see people's priorities or values expressed primarily, not necessarily exclusively, but usually in three forms, which is time, money, and energy, right? So if you help people, sometimes they think that their priority is this, or that they don't even know what their spending is necessarily until you really break it down, or they think that they prioritize this, but if you actually look at it, it's like, well, you may say that, but it doesn't seem like maybe this is aligned. So what if we did this, or, move things around to better express and serve what you actually say that you care about? Or is it fair that maybe you feel like you should say that that is what you care about, or that's what you should prioritize, but maybe that's not true, and that's okay, and that can be liberating to let go of that and embrace maybe something that's a little more authentic.
Right.
Yeah, it's great insights.
So a question that I have for you, and just kind of listening to everything that you're saying there, it really is about people's attitude towards money, yes?
That's a big
kind of a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
So coming from a Christian background, I grew up, multi-generational Christian, grandparents, parents, grew up in the church, and always really kind of got the message from conservative Christian circles anyway, that money was the root of all evil.
Yep.
Right. So can you share your thoughts around that a little bit? I know that I've come to some different conclusions over the years than what I believed growing up, and certainly in our early ministry years.
Right.
We were pastors, but we were poor. We didn't have money, because that was how you showed your spirituality.
When they said those poor pastors, they really meant it.
They really meant those poor pastors. But it was almost a sign of your humility and your spirituality to say that you had, sacrificed all of these things, and you were showing by the way that you lived your life, i.e. penniless, that you did not have a love of money. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I'm sure there's some listeners out there that may be wrestling either consciously or subconsciously with that very question.
Absolutely. It's a great one. And I actually go into that in pretty great depth in the book.
Okay, good.
Exactly this. And just kind of hit on it a second ago. I don't know if you noticed it, but people typically and kind of subjugate or subordinate your potential destiny, your calling, your dependence on God, relationship with Him, and it gets you off track, right? And it's just, and it says, man, I've pierced themselves with many griefs and sorrows, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not the money itself. And again, like I said before, money is just like a fire or water. It is just a neutral element that can be used.
It's a tool.
Or for good. As tool, it can be used as a tool. It can be used as a weapon. It can be used as all kinds of different things. It's really the heart of the person who wields towards it that ultimately is how it manifests.
Yeah. I like that language around it. It's good explanation.
Yeah. And I'd add to that too, that for those people who think that's the most spiritual thing, how many people can you impact positively if you're broke or broken? If you're sick and broke, that means maybe your basic necessities are taken care of for you, but how are you going to pour out and be generous and make an impact? If we're talking about nations or even a single person,
right?
The more resources that you have, whether that's, health, wealth, energy, influence, whatever the case is, right? The more that you have, the more that you can give, the more you can receive, and this virtuous cycle can keep increasing. And if you're only thinking, oh God, I just want enough for
values, go take a look at your bank account or your credit card statement or your checkbook. That'll soon tell you, do you value what God values? And that's always been a good litmus test as well, that actually in and of itself, that's all it is. It's a certificate of value, and it just shows the things that you do value. And to that point, exactly. It's like an element of, water, fire, whatever. It really in and of itself, it's amoral. It has no moral value, but you put it in the hands of I don't know, an arms runner, or someone who's into
a drug dealer.
or drug dealer, or human trafficker, or someone like that, versus put it in the hands of someone who's actively going about trying to raise the tide for people to flourish. The money itself hasn't changed, but it's where it's ascribed, and the value that's ascribed to it is your value power and control. Is your vow of love and kindness and blessing, very, very different things.
Absolutely. And I'd also put that the other way too, not just in terms of the money, the way you allocate the money you have, but by virtue of how much money you make or receive, that may, not necessarily, but that may also be an indication of the value that you have contributed to somebody else. Right. And that's manifested.
Right.
Because if people are valuing what you're providing or what you're doing, and they're going to pay, a commensurate price for that. So you could get wonky with this if you take it in a weird direction. But I think it's not unfair to say that those that are making a lot of money are generally, in some way, and you could interpret this, depending on your worldview, they're providing some kind of value to some kind of person that's going to pay for that. So I think it's also, hopefully that's kind of approaching it from both sides of the coin, so to speak, is that poverty spirit, I think, is really behind that kind of mentality and that thinking. And there are times where maybe we're called for lean years. I certainly had my share of those when we first met. Mark, I was the leanest I'd ever been, kind of just on this Holy Spirit breadcrumb trail, not knowing where it was going to lead. And then there's times of plenty, right? And so, like Paul said, he's learned to live with little and with much, and the secret is contentment in all things. And certainly how you're aligned with the Father's heart and what he has you doing at that point in time.
So good. Let's take the conversation then into this area. We've touched on a little bit already of discipling nations. And for those who perhaps are new to the power of new, we have an acronym that we find is helpful. It's certainly by no means exhaustive because it's such a broad subject, but trying to get some handles on what does this thing mean. And as we've sort of looked at it, we've seen it over NATIONS, and we've looked at nature as our N.
Just stop for a minute. Looked at this thing.
Looked at discipling nations.
Discipling nations.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
That it
you
involves.
hadn't said that yet.
Good point. She's not just smart; she's helpful as well. But discipling nations, as we look at it through the lens of nature, okay, we have a responsibility to this big blue marble, and I'm not talking about the extreme agenda that we see out there. I'm talking about just basic responsibility to make sure you've got healthy soil for people to plant crops, and clean water for people to drink, and good air for them to breathe, good seeds for them to put into the ground, all of those sorts of things. And that nature is a key part of discipling a nation. That A is academia, the free flowing of knowledge, so that it's not just the wealthy that hold all the knowledge and the power, there's a free flowing to all levels of society and cultures. The T is talent retention. You show me an impoverished nation, I'll show you a nation that bleeds its talent to the nations around it. The I, which was where we'll dive in here, is an investment. And what does it look like? How is capital, or the use of capital and how it's applied, what does that do? O is order and governance. When we look at the nature of order and governance, is it fair and equitable? Where there's societies that you can trust when you trade and when you live, that the things are going to be fair and honest. The other end then is news media, that doesn't seek to cause harm, but does actually seek to find and release the truth. And S is then society, the social services, that there are easy on-ramps for those that desperately need it and who are the most affected in society and who need the help and support of those who have means. And so when we look at that in terms of nations, why is that important? Because we're creating societies where humans can flourish. Now, again, there's an agenda on that term, even, that we see from people that I would say are many things but not Christian. But what do we mean by that? Well, we mean that this is actually the full release of the image of God in somebody, creating societies where the image of God has got permission to become and be made fully manifest and alive. And that's important because it says to the world, God is with us, because God is revealed through you and me and you and me, and along we go. So creating these environments and to try and get a handle on discipling nations. How do we know we're crossing the finish line that Jesus has put in place? Is a conversation that we believe has been held for too long behind pulpits and in theological institutions, and needs to be put into the hands of and into the mouths and the conversations of people that are out there in real life with real people, seeing these things put in place. So, that's sort of the scope of how we're trying to rope this very big and at times slippery subject, trying to rope it down. But from the perspective that you hold, Ryan, again, just a bit of a recap is you've been in the military space. You've been, you've defended your country. It says you have high value for the nation in which you live. In this case, you live in America, in Colorado. This is a place that you want to defend. You've also been in the theological space. You've been through Bible college and training. You've also been in the investment money space. You've got such a broad perspective. As you think of a working definition of discipling nations, how do you see that? What lens do you look through, and what sorts of conclusions do you draw?
That's a great question. And it's kind of funny when you hear somebody else encapsulate all these things from a different perspective. It's definitely been an interesting journey in my life, a very atypical career progression, so to speak. But, from a very broad standpoint, I love the way you framed all that. These things are all eventually connected. And I think if we can look at things and I don't want to get too political or economic here, but once government interference, even by the smartest people in the world, there's no way that one person or 12 people, and I'm referring to the Federal Reserve or any other thing, can incorporate all price and supply information as efficiently as the market itself. And where I'm going with this is I've seen this play out in a political sense, in economic sense, in nature and governance and ministry and families. Is ultimately, a truly free market is where there's no central authority. The market participants are the ones setting supply and demand and prices based on their buying and selling activities. And it's amazing how the market, left to itself, will actually regulate and have a self-equilibrium dynamic where excesses become diminished and opportunities become exploited, and it's just constantly this process of equilibrium. And when the market, again, when I came back to saying people might say that this is what their values are, but it's demonstrated primarily again through time, energy, and money. And in the marketplace, if there are you got to so many things you hit on in that. But one of the big ones is having just not too much interference, but just enough. I'll use an analogy here of a football game, let's say, or any game, it doesn't matter. But you don't want the refs ultimately deciding the outcome of the game, but they do play an important role, right? If you don't have any boundaries or parameters, there's no definitions or limits in which you play the game, right? And so you have to have those minimal things, those sidelines, what's onside, what's offsides, what's out of bounds, illegal or whatever. But you don't ideally want those refs ultimately beyond just making calls that need to be made for the game to function properly. You want them minimally involved and hopefully not deciding really important like game time decision outcomes, right? So in the same way, I would say you want markets and economies and societies to function in the same way, where you've got this basic structure of rule of law, property rights, things that keep the rules of the game fair and honest for everybody, right? And unfortunately, I think a lot of people can see that's not necessarily the case. Probably better in America than a lot of places, but when everybody can interact freely and their own decisions, which really manifest, by the prices they're, buying or selling at, and how that regulates everything, then everybody's preferences are aggregately being, taken into account. And it has this amazing function, as I studied this in financial planning, where even if no one individual has this kind of, insight or ability to see all these, the market itself almost becomes like a living organism, or a level of sentience almost, where it is able to take in information that no one of the individual participants has and optimize. So we call this the wisdom of crowds, or emergent, deep regularities that will eventually manifest. And I know this is really technical. I'm trying to.
No, this is good.
You're doing great.
People are all doing what's in their own mutual self-interest, which is an interesting concept, but also in a way that's fair, equitable, honoring, legal, ethical, etc. Then it not only aggregate that individual decision or that one transaction between two parties is hopefully, only in both of those people's best interests. Otherwise, why would they engage in the trade, right?
Right.
But at a larger level, it can also make things more efficient. And I think that when you start to interfere with how the market mechanism works, and you could think of, a democratic republic like the US or maybe Australia or any number of countries where it's almost like a free market system politically, in the same sense that there is financially and economically in a traditional market, that, the market, in this case, the voting, constituency, the population has made a choice. And then you can see this play out in all these different ways that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Julie, where it's not wrong to want to make a profit and to do well, right? And you don't, like Jesus said, be as cunning as serpents and innocent as doves, right? So we don't want to be suckers and losing our money in trades when, we're called to be good stewards, but we don't want to be greedy or selfish either. And if all those things happen in an ideal structure in society, I know you talk about reformation and we're talking about disciple nations, systems are very important as well as individuals, right? So when you got a combination of the right governance, the right systems, the right mechanisms with the right heart and minds, or even without the right heart and mind, sometimes the system itself can almost make up for that, but it's a both and thing. And it ultimately is when you see too much power or authority centralized in one or very few people. See that, what initially could start out as fairly benign or even, well-intended, that ultimately in extreme form becomes despotism and these things that we've seen throughout history that might sound good in theory, but won't work out so well in reality. And you can see that at almost every single level, right? Politically, economically, socially, environmentally, like everything you just said. I'm thinking of, like, if you contrast, these different types of systems, then you also see the moral decay of the people in those systems. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So when you get this combination of money, power, influence, and all these things, if it's not stewarded and structured in the right way, then it really it can make a huge difference. I think for someone like me who's got the inclination and the passion to understand these things, that it's incumbent on me to use that knowledge for good and to help educate people and do what I can to make even what little ripple of difference in that pond or ocean might be the case, and everybody has their own version of that. So, if you're a mechanic, or if you're in, arts and entertainment, or anything that's completely foreign to me, you've got your own version of that. And I don't even know what the question was. I feel like I've rambled on forever.
No, this is great stuff. I think one of the key things that comes out particularly is I love the illustration of a game of football when you got referees, umpires, whatever, and you want some because they help to stop the game from being, just a process of anarchy. Yeah, that's right. That they actually put some parameters around it. Right. What I've seen we travel a lot, as you know, we're in many different nations over any different time. What I'm seeing more and more and more within the Western system at the moment, and I don't know that it's manifest this strongly as I'm seeing it now, is that the system tends to be moving towards a governance system that picks the winners and losers. And I look at that and go, hang on a second. Right. The refs are totally determining the outcome of the game. Right. Now, I can be very specific here, and I know I'm speaking for both sides of the aisle here in America when I say this, because of a recent bill that's just come in through the House with regards to crypto. And so it's just like, okay, you actually got a reasonably bipartisan bill that's put together within the terms of the last 8 years anyway. It's probably one of the most bipartisan bills that's gone through. Yeah. But when I look at what's been going on in the lead up to that with the Securities and Exchange Commission, regulation by enforcement, and people that are just running renegade, picking winners and losers in an industry, the impact that's had is some of the brightest and smartest in that space in this nation have gone to other countries all around the world. Going, I'm not putting up with this nonsense. I can't function. My business cannot run in this type of environment. So they hightail it out of there. All the while, and now we know there's we've got this bill that's going through, and there's all sorts of, okay, will it be vetoed? Will it not? All these sorts of things. But what it's saying is that both sides of the House are sort of standing up, going, this actually can't go on, because we're seeing this is not a healthy environment for development. We want to be the sharp end of the spear, not the tail feathers on the back of the arrow, because right now we don't even know if we're even on the arrow because we're so far behind. And I think they've been using, you'd know this better than I, no doubt, but the Howey test. They've been using a framework of determining whether a crypto is a security or not. So that's a good question to ask. It's a sensible question to ask, because there's lots of bad players in that market right now, and evil actors, and now they are being weeded out, like your FTX and all. They're gradually they're sort of they're being found out and sorted out. But I was going somewhere with that. Where was I going with that? And then I derailed myself.
You're talking about the refs just deciding the outcome.
Yeah, I was. And then it just went. My word, isn't that odd?
That's usually me. That's not usually you.
No.
Well, you did make some really good points in there, and if you want, it'll probably come back to you just as soon as
it will.
As we start ruminating on it again.
But the point being, though, is that we've got these environments and these evil actors that are within these environments that are going, okay, we've taken advantage of it, but all the while we've got a governance system that's going, well, you over there, we're going to give you a free pass. You over here, you've got too much power. We're actually going to pull you back. But that's what it was. It was to do with the orange groves. So the Howey test. Okay, that's where I was going. Let's come back in here. Bear with me, everybody, here at the Power of New. I've just had a brain with that. So anyway, so with the Howey test, it was orange groves. Okay, that was the law that was built, called the Howey test. Howey was this orange grower, and whether there was securities or not with what he was doing, and what was an orange? Was it a security or was it a commodity? All these sorts of questions. So they've taken this Howey test from the 1930s and go, that'll do for the whole crypto space. We don't want to change anything because we think we can use this to pick winners and losers. All the while, you've got this extremely complex space, but the power brokers going, we don't want to change anything because we've got so much power. We can pick and who gets a free pass and who doesn't. Again, being specific, you think of something like Ethereum, which if you're in the crypto space, you'll be acutely aware of Ethereum. Ethereum's just chug going along its way. And then on I don't know if it was CNBC or it was one of those things anyway. It might have been Yahoo Finance, whatever it was. Jay Clayton, who's in the SEC at the time, actually publicly goes, oh, and by the way, Ethereum is not a security. The price of Ethereum hockey stick literally explodes through the roof. And it was an arbitrary statement that he just goes and makes because he goes, I represent the SEC. And then there's others that have come in and the SEC has gone and taken them to court for exactly the same things.
Right.
And you sit there and go, how can you have a society that flourishes when you have those things in place? So that illustration of letting the market determine, I have a strong resonance with that when it comes to creating a building block to put in place to create a nation where humans can flourish. Because what the flow-on effect, if you don't get that right in this context, is you've got talent retention becoming a very real issue in a space that, i.e., decentralized finance and all of these other things, DeFi, and crypto and blockchain and all of those things, the world's going to be built on it in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And America's brightest are starting to exit the shores where the rules are more fair, are more equitable, and much more understandable.
And if you look, and it's so many great points there, Mark. And if you look at just crypto in general, it is by nature, as you said, decentralized, right? That's what makes it so appealing. Right. Because you don't have a central authority, which is very few people deciding these really important things. And if you see, the full faith and credit of the US dollar isn't what it used to be, unfortunately, especially since COVID. They're blowing out the deficits in the budget at exponential rates. And this is true of every fiat currency that's ever existed, right? They have countries that are strong or empires that are strong, and then
about 100 years that lasts.
Currency, and then eventually they lose their discipline and they go off any kind of discipline or gold standard or whatever the case is, where it's backed by something tangible, and you start to get devaluation of currency, inflation, and eventually not one single fiat currency in the history of mankind has ever survived. So the emergence of these decentralized platforms like Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, because it truly is a currency people use. A lot of people use it more as a store of value or as an investment, but it really is an actual currency. That's really powerful because you don't have a central authority. The other thing that's important about Bitcoin is it has a finite supply. It's built into the code, right? And so this is a good microcosm maybe of what we're just talking about. You've got a system in place, but you also have users of that system, and both combined kind of determine the value or lack thereof. And I think that as we see, as time goes on, I think that's going to be important for people to understand more and more because, at the rate that the U.S. is going with its deficits and the, fiscal cliff, and all these kinds of things, it's important. And you could apply that same thing to many other applications. Interest rates are another big one that I think is vastly influential. And I won't get into all the details of that, but it's just better to have the market decide things. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to create the most aggregate good if you have, again, minimal structure to keep the rules of the game fair and keep it from descending into tyranny or chaos or, anarchy, like you said, but minimal involvement to let the market basically self-regulate. And I think, you even see maybe an element of that in the church where you've got like a really strong pastor or authority figure. Maybe they're getting a lot done, but and you see this is kind of old covenant. You see like Moses and Joshua and all these like important figures. Whereas when Jesus came in, he was still really important, but his whole thing was decentralization, right? It was putting himself lower, dispersing, distributing the power, the influence to the people around him, and that had excellent.
Great example.
So that was just right off the top of the head. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. I love it. I love it. It's and when you look at what revival is, again, we get back into this discipling nations, revival, all of these sort of words and this language that gets thrown around this subject matter. You don't have to be a theologian to know that revival that has the greatest impact is the ones that are decentralized. And when revival dies out, what? Because the church tries to control it and put systems in place to predict semi-predictable outcomes. But when it runs, and it'll run with warts and all, there'll be all sorts of problems and issues with it. It's not about having no issues. And history has shown that there has been horrendous things that have happened along the way. But also, I posit horrendous things happen through the control that we see in the systems that we have in place as well, where people are manipulated and controlled and left feeling guilty and whatever. And all because of these these command systems, command and control systems that are put in place. And certainly they were the systems that I was trained in and developed in, was command and control leadership. That's, that was all strong in the 70s and the 80s and early 90s, the mid 90s probably, before we started talking more about, the nature of servant leadership and the like. But this decentralizing, this releasing is...
Yeah, the letting go of control is the thing that most people are afraid of.
Yeah.
Because the big question is, well, what about the sin issue? And I can't help but think these days, what about the sin issue? Jesus dealt with the sin issue. It's
Right.
Holy Spirit's job to deal with the sin issue in somebody. It's his job to build his church. It's not ours to control it. So,
well, Paul says he doesn't even judge himself, doesn't
right.
he?
And if you read through through the New Testament, the Corinthians, were messing things up all over the place.
Yes.
Why did Paul have to write to the Corinthians? He had to address some things.
Sure.
And when Jesus gave the Great Commission, he gave it knowing that there would be Corinthian-style churches out there that would need correction and that would need to be, need to be corrected and disciplined. But that's God's job.
Yeah.
And
right.
Paul was kind of, reminding them that, hey, here are the parameters. He didn't control them to fit within them, but he reminded them of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where we fall down a lot.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about church, whether we're talking about finance, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about anything, we fall down there because we want to control instead of just reminding, here's the parameters that we're supposed to stick within, and then trying to control people to keep within them. Anyway, now I'm rambling.
No, I think, again, if I was distilling this down, we're sort of getting to that point of self-determination through market is one of the great ways we create environments for humans to flourish.
And you guys have done a phenomenal job. I just want to put a feather in your cap for you, because you guys, since I've known you, have been all about this decentralized, flat, hub and spoke model. And you've not only demonstrated it personally, but you've facilitated it beautifully from, just even, it's been a while since we talked, but since just catching up over the last couple of days and before we started recording, it's so great to see that decentralized model clearly showing proof of concept and working in beautiful, amazing, miraculous ways. And I think this is a great analogy of just what we talked about with markets and minimal. You do need some structure and parameters, or else it will end into chaos or anarchy or whatever, but just enough to define a condition or a set of conditions that are going to lead to certain outcomes, and they're always going to be good. And even capitalism in its pure form, there's the creative destruction element to it, right? There are going to be some companies, and there's going to be winners and losers, and that's okay. But overall, it's going to be bigger. Now, obviously, in the kingdom's eyes, like, God loves everybody. Nobody's more or less important than anybody else. But it's just fascinating to me how you can apply these concepts across so many different.
Amen.
Right.
That's it. Yeah, exactly right. No, I love that. Thank you as well. And we're getting ready to land the plane here in just a few moments. But just as we do, we have a phrase around here we call fresh demonies, the fresh testimonies, the fresh things that God's doing. What's something that's happening right where you are right now?
Well, this one's hot off the press. This is just as of Friday, actually. I had one set of clients that, was excited to work with, and they were believers, and they're kind of outside our typical client profile at the beginning, but I thought that there was enough things that it made sense to work with them. We do have a premium service, so I just want to make sure that anytime I'm working with somebody, it's actually helping them move forward instead of setting them back. It's just another expense. And unfortunately, in the intervening several months since we first connected at the end of last year, their situation has changed dramatically on multiple levels. And it was kind of hard to it felt like the goalposts were moving pretty often. And without getting into details, I kind of felt like we were having to go back over the same thing many times, just because they were changing a lot. And then there were some technical difficulties. And bottom line was kind of rather abruptly after our last formal session a few weeks ago, the clients, said that, hey, we don't think this is a right fit. And eventually said, not only do we not want to pay the remaining contract fees that we'd put in the contract, they wanted a refund of half of what they'd already paid. And while I certainly didn't want to leave them worse off than they started, because unfortunately we're not far enough through that I could give them any, practical action recommendations at this point, because we just weren't there yet. So I felt bad, as they both lost their jobs, and they weren't completely, like they had some other things going on, but it was, it felt like I had put in the work. I had done the best I could. I felt like, there was a lot of things outside my control, and that I tried to keep them without getting to a point of discouragement or unduly provoking anxiety. In our last session, I kind of made it like, look, this is a dramatically different situation than we were talking about even a week ago, let alone 6 months ago. And bottom line is that, I felt like it was frustrating to me, and it didn't feel like fair that I'd put this work in and done the best I could given the circumstances. But I also saw their point, and we just decided, we're just going to do what they're asking and feel good about that. And it took a lot of humility and a lot of, generosity. And I really struggled with that. I lost sleep the night before, but, I felt good about it. I felt like, it probably isn't a good fit at this point. And I think that's important if you're in business.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I'm becoming more and more aware of is that not everybody is my client. In fact, probably most people are not my clients. And that's important to recognize.
Right.
Yep.
And as I was talking about this with my mom in particular, both my parents, but, my mom, really felt strongly like, I really think this is a setup for you. I know this is tough and difficult emotionally, financially, et cetera. But I think this is an open door. And literally just that same day yesterday, I had connected with another couple who is very much in our wheelhouse in terms of, their income, net worth, the different levers that we have to play with that are kind of in our niche kind of boutique wheelhouse. And that is looking very promising. Nothing's definitive yet, but it was literally the same day that we ended one. This other one came in, clearly be so much better. So
come on.
Hopefully more to share and follow up on that. But I'd say that probably fits the definition of a fresh.
Thank you, Lord. And again, the heart of generosity to go, okay, how can...
how do you bless?
Yeah, that's right.
And how can God...
I mean, it's been literally night and day. It's been so effective, efficient, mutually beneficial. And it's like, man, how is this so much different? And I had to own my part of that. And I think that's important, that humility and personal ownership. But if you're willing to do that, you can turn, like I talk about in the book, what's looks like a setback can actually be a setup.
Yeah,
so, it's definitely, I'm not trying to paint this as like they were 100% in the wrong and I'm right. There was a mutual thing, but I just, it was painful, and it was a learning experience, but like you said, it's messy in the kingdom. It doesn't,
it is.
You want that perfect sense of organization and order and control. And that is not how it looked in Jesus's life. And he was the perfect textbook model.
Yeah, that's right. Man, that's good. Well, yay God for that. And even more favor and influence coming your way as you walk out these kingdom principles of love and generosity while stewarding the resources and the relationships well. We got one last landing question, my dear.
One last landing question. It's the fun one.
Everybody is on the edge of their seats.
In the interests of new and how powerful new things can be, what was the last thing you purchased online, and what was it for?
So this one's kind of interesting. I don't know if you guys have this where you live, but there in Denver and many other cities, there are electric bikes and scooters.
Oh yeah,
that you can rent.
Yep.
The company here that I see the most is called Lime, Lime.
Yeah.
There's also Lyft has some things like this. And so just on Friday night, I took one of these scooters. I've used these before, and they're just kind of fun to ride. And they're just like, we've got a lot of them in this area. So it's like right by my house. I walk over 5 minutes from where I live, pick one up, put it on the credit card right there. And then you use this Friday. I was late at night, didn't see a big curb and hit it, and definitely face planted in the concrete.
Stink.
That was the first time I had done that. So you do need to be careful. I'll put that caveat out there, but they're pretty fun and they're good to get from point A to B. So that was, as I looked at my credit card statement, knowing this question was coming up, that was, I think,
He's great. We've never had that one before.
That's awesome.
Oh, that is fantastic. So
I'm sorry that you took the spill.
Yeah, that's it. You paid a high price.
Yeah. Yeah, I should have been a little bit more careful, but and then one before that, this is somewhat recent as well for me. It wasn't online, but I did actually buy an electric bike, so that's pretty fun. I'm really enjoying that for exercise and commuting and back to the nature. It's kind of a carbon friendly footprint. And I'm actually using that instead of my car for right now, kind of giving myself a healthy challenge since
there you go
with the car. And I've been waiting to. So I've kind of been playing this game of how long can I go? And it's amazing between what you can order online with groceries and all these things. That's another thing I looked at and saw a lot of Instacart and grocery delivery stuff. It's pretty fun. So I'm really enjoying some of these new technologies that are environmentally friendly, cost efficient, fun, and practical.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. And again, all around this subject of what does it mean to disciple nations so humans can flourish.
Right.
That is good stuff. Well, again, the Power of New podcast relies on the support of its listeners like you. So you can help us continue delivering this content by donating through the provided link. If you're a US resident or US-based business looking to donate, your donation is, of course, tax deductible. Ryan Haley, a pleasure, my friend. Great having you on with us.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure as always. Good to catch up and see you guys. And I just hope that resonates and blesses whoever needed to hear whatever they needed to hear.
Amen. Stick around. We're going to pray for you in just a few moments. But remember, God wants to take you further and deeper into encounters with his always perfect love for greater impact because he wants to love the world through you. God bless you guys. We're going to look forward to seeing you here again next week at The Power of New. Stick around, Ryan. We'll be with you in just a second.